broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
My name is Laura Brancato, and I'm an attorney with the law firm of Littman Krooks. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our webinar, which will focus on the changing landscape of care. And I hope during the time that we have together, I'll be able to get you some information regarding changes in caregiving and how you can protect yourself and your loved ones in this changing environment. So let's just jump right in. So the most important thing when thinking about how to prepare for the future is to think about who are caregivers and who are they caring for. Traditionally, I think when we hear the word caregiver, most of us jump to this assumption that this is provided by some kind of formal person, whether that be a nurse or a doctor, or let's say a home attendant caregiver in a home or in a nursing home setting. And we consider that we're caring for maybe those who are elderly or those who have been injured or are suffering from a long-term illness. But I'm challenging you during this webinar to think a little bit more broadly about who are caregivers, because I would venture to say that almost everybody listening to this webinar is a caregiver in some sense of the word. We are branching out of caregiver as a formal person, a doctor or a nurse, and thinking about anybody who lends assistance to a loved one, a family member, a neighbor, or a friend as a caregiver. What are the burdens placed on caregivers in today's society? And are we caring for just our elderly relatives, or are we also caring for young children or disabled children? And how has that changed over the last 20 years, and how will that continue to change over the next 20 years? And what impact that will have on us as the caregiver, on those we're caring for, and on those who rely on us who might be younger than ourselves. So let's start by framing the issue by talking about the statistics as they currently exist. And there are so many resources readily available regarding caregiving. And so I would encourage you, if you have more questions, either to speak with someone here at the law firm or to look to organizations like the Alzheimer's Association or Caring Kind or some of the many organizations who are providing information in this space. So 5.8 million Americans living with Alzheimer's and other dementias in 2019. So that averages out to about 1 in 10 people aged 65 or older afflicted with some type of cognitive impairment. And of course, this is a varying degree. And the projections are that by 2050, 7 million people aged 85 and over are projected to have Alzheimer's or dementia. And this is going to represent a stark change in the landscape of how we care for individuals with cognitive impairment. This is a broad-ranging issue. It doesn't just affect the Alzheimer's or dementia patient, it affects everybody around that person in a formal and informal caregiving setting. And these statistics just deal with cognitive impairment, but we also know that as Americans live longer lives, that their need for care increases. And whether that's from an informal or formal standpoint, that burden will shift to someone, and how can we plan against that? So let's look at caregiving structures and how we traditionally think of how care needs are met. So some of the most common caregiving structures currently in place, many of us think of a nursing home or a hospital, a medical facility. Some of us may already be familiar with home care assistance or the services of a home attendant. Adult day programming, meaning almost like daycare, but for older individuals who either have cognitive impairment and cannot be home alone during the day, or are looking for socialization opportunities throughout the day. Additionally, we are talking about continuing care communities and assisted living communities. These are some of the newer community settings that can provide for individuals as they age, those who want to avail themselves of more of a community setting, not necessarily living in their own home, but agreeing to live among others, other seniors who are looking for more social and emotional involvement. Senior centers or senior advocacy groups, and many of our communities here in Westchester and beyond have wonderful local senior centers or senior advocacy groups that either come through town services, through village services, or even broader groups that span over the county. And then we talk about the informal caregiving structures, which are services provided by family, friends, neighbors, and other community members. So let's talk about the shift to informal caregiving. Traditionally, care has been provided by the first 6 structures that we talked about: the nursing home, the assisted living facility, the memory care unit. But there's a great shift moving the burden to informal caregivers, and that's due to a number of factors. The first I mentioned a bit earlier, that as people live longer, informal caregivers start providing support to elderly relatives or loved ones or friends or neighbors, and they have to do that for longer and longer periods of time. And we also see that primarily because we have a lot of care needs that cannot be met either because there are insufficient funds to meet those needs, or there aren't available opportunities for support to be made in a formal setting, whether that's some of our friends and neighbors who live further upstate New York, for example. There are far fewer opportunities for formal caregiving. There are less senior centers, there are less adult day programming opportunities. So if you don't have opportunities in your community, you necessarily will need to rely on some less formal structures to receive that type of support. So right now, we know from some of the statistics that have been coming out that approximately 18.5 billion hours of informal caregiving are being provided by Alzheimer's or dementia caregivers. And that was a 2018 statistic. I'm sure that number increased in 2019. And that's valued at over $234 billion in services provided just in this area of Alzheimer's and dementia care. And because of the shift to informal caregiving, we're going to talk about what are the impacts of those types of changes on the caregiver themselves. 83% of help provided to older adults in the US comes from family members, friends, and other unpaid caregivers. And that's important because it really flies in the face of the stereotype that we discussed at the start of the presentation, which indicates that most people think that care is being provided in a formal setting when in fact it's really not. Approximately, we know generally 2/3 of caregivers are women. Approximately 1/4 of dementia caregivers are of the sandwich generation. And that may be a term that you may or may not be familiar with. It's becoming fairly common terminology. That sandwich generation refers to a generation of caregivers who are both caring for an aging, and it says here parent, but that could be anybody that you care for in your life, a family member or a friend or a neighbor, and also caring for children or other dependents under the age of 18. And this is a growing segment of the population as people wait longer to have children and are in their 30s and 40s upon having their first child. They are more likely, obviously, to also have an aging relative at the same time. And what are the strains on those caregivers from both ends of the spectrum? So let's talk specifically as an example about the sandwich generation and economic impact, because it gives us a framework for how this shift in informal caregiving is burdening the population as a whole. So unpaid caregivers, for example, in the 4 most populated states, New York, Florida, Texas, and California, provided care last year valued at more than $14 billion. And so what that means when we talk about unpaid caregiving is somebody somewhere along the line is giving up paid opportunities in order to provide support to a person in need. And this disproportionately then affects the caregiver themselves. In this specific instance, we're talking about lost wages, right? I'm sure we've all had a circumstance, whether it's for a younger person or an older person, where we've had to take a day off of work, potentially unpaid, or even an unpaid leave of absence. We're talking about the burden that then shifts to the caregiver from an economic perspective of lost wages, lost savings if you're not working or taking time off from work. Maybe you're not contributing to your 401k or to other investment accounts because your available resources are now being utilized to care for somebody in an informal setting. So you're taking time away from your career or your job, which necessarily then is a financial burden on you as well. Looking forward, the caregiver who saves less over their own lifetime is then far more likely to be affected when they need care, that they will run up against a shortage of resources to provide care for themselves, thereby passing the burden of their care to the generation behind them. So we're talking about this in a global sense because this is a really important dynamic to try to tackle as early as possible. And whether that's that your loved one of the older generation is healthy and well, and what you can do to make sure they put themselves in the best possible situation, whether you think about taking advantage of more structured care, where can you access those things? That's what we're here to do and to discuss today, so that we can try to offset the disproportionate effects of, let's say, the sandwich generation, for example. We also know that caregivers are 2 times as likely that they are women than men. And what is the disproportionate effect on women who traditionally live longer? If a woman who traditionally lives longer outlives her spouse, what are the disproportionate effects of her taking not only time off to maybe start her own family, maternity leaves or extended leaves from her career in order to care for her younger children, who then also necessarily needs to take leave to care for her family, her older family members? What are the disproportionate financial effects on women, and how can we offset those? So the most important tool that anybody as an informal or formal caregiver can use is to be proactive, to think proactively, not just about your older generation loved one, but about your own planning. How can we all, no matter our age, think about how to put ourselves in the most advantageous position financially and emotionally to protect your loved one and yourself at the same time? So the most important step, and the reason that us here at Littman Krooks feel so passionately about this topic, is that the most important step is to be proactive and assure that estate planning documents are done. And we'll go through those on the, in just a minute. To seek formal support where available and affordable. And what that means is really doing a deep dive into what services are available in your community or in the community where your loved one lives, to assure that you are taking advantage of every opportunity that is offered. And I will say that in this space, in the space of seniors and advances in different types of care and care plans, there are constantly changing opportunities. This is not a static situation. You will often find, and we find even here through our professional associations, that on a bi-yearly basis, we're getting updates about new kinds of facilities or new kinds of programming. And usually the best place to start is to look at the county level. What is available to you through Westchester County? And seeking out the resources at a county level, or a New York County within Manhattan, or Queens County, or upstate, Rockland County, or Orange County. What county resources are available? Most counties have Department of Aging or Elderly Services, and then filtering down from there, what's available in your neighborhood, and then what might be available through an association like the Alzheimer's Association, or Caring Kind, or some of these other organizations that can provide more of a formal support to take the burden off of informal caregivers. And that necessarily goes with the next point, which is to discuss financial plans with your loved ones to assure funding. And when I say that, I know that that doesn't always necessarily equate with the most comfortable conversation that you might have with a loved one. But the worst case scenario, and one that we see here often, is not having that discussion and an emergency arises, and then as the caregiver or loved one, trying to plan without much information, which is a really difficult predicament to be in. And part of this is to try to understand whether the person you're caring for has even thought about how to fund support for themselves, and not waiting until the last minute to find out that there were other opportunities that nobody availed themselves of. And so that necessarily leads to the next point, which is to investigate other, or really all forms of financial support, including insurance policies and the like, which we'll get into in one of the next slides. So let's go to the first point, which are the essential estate planning documents. And here we're talking about a number of different types of planning documents that are available. We certainly prepare these for many of our clients here at Littman Krooks. advanced directives, which include power of attorney and healthcare proxy, among other documents. But the two most prominent in that category: power of attorney, which gives somebody legal or financial decision-making authority so that they can assist you in paying bills or making financial decisions, insurance transactions, things like that. And the healthcare proxy, which relates only to health-related decision-making. And those documents are generally used in an emergency when the person who creates the document cannot evidence their own wishes. Somebody else can step in and take over and try to help make decisions in either the hospital or nursing home setting, or even at a hospice level. Secondarily to those documents, obviously the document I think that stands out to most people is a will. So the will is a document that deals with your choices after you've passed away, how you want your assets to be distributed. It's not as important during your lifetime because you won't really be affected by what's in your will after your passing, but it is essential to have a will laid out to avoid protracted issues after your passing. And in conjunction with the basic level of estate planning, we talk about the possibility of establishing living trusts. And those instruments are generally used by attorneys to plan, to do advanced planning, to protect your assets from liens or claims, nursing home bills, or medical bills, things of that nature. And those can readily be explored with an estate planning attorney to discuss specifically for you what applies based on the type of things that you own. Do you have property in many states? Do you have extensive investment accounts? Do you have overseas assets, things like that, where trust would be very advantageous for a client of that type. And that moves into long-term care policies. So here we're talking about consultation with a licensed insurance professional. Attorneys cannot and should not advise about policies, insurance policies, but we need to be aware of the vastly changing insurance market. It used to be that many big insurers wrote lots of different kinds of long-term care policies that would be available to pay for care at home or care in a facility, even geriatric care management services or medical equipment, things of that nature. And over time, we've seen the insurance industry change vastly in this area. And that's due to the number of individuals who are making claims on those insurance policies. It's simply become unaffordable for insurance companies to issue the policies in the way they once had because of the growing number of individuals who are needing to rely on the policies as they age. And this is an important factor to take into consideration. When an insurance company is predicting into the future that the cost of caring for someone is too high, we should all take notice of that and think, okay, if the insurance industry is unwilling to insure this issue because they feel that the cost of care will be burdensome, then as individuals, what else can we do to make sure that we're protected? And one of the newer products on the market is it's called a hybrid care policy, and this is something you can discuss with an insurance agent. And this is a way that the insurance industry has kind of reinvented the wheel. And all of these policies are important to consider because they would provide additional cash assistance, additional resources, so that an informal caregiver is not necessary, that a formal caregiver can be employed or an assisted living facility can be funded. And these are really important options. We would all want to have as many options available to us as possible. And having funds available through a long-term care policy or a hybrid life insurance policy make the planning part much, much easier. And that is in lockstep with financial planning. And again, not through an attorney's office, but through a certified financial planner. Oftentimes you'll find a financial planner, if you have someone you already work with, they may have a recommendation of an insurance agent that they work with. Those two go hand in hand. Adequate financial planning, many companies have tools on their website, whether it's the bigger brokerages, Charles Schwab or Vanguard passively managed accounts. You can go onto those websites and they all have tools. New York Life has a great tool to try to estimate what are the costs of retirement in your zip code. what are the things you should consider in trying to figure out, have you saved enough for retirement? How long do you have to work? We have many clients here who ask us that question. How many more years until I can retire? What do you think is prudent? And really those questions are best asked of a financial planner or any certified financial analyst, and they can give you the tools to look at where your savings are, how you hold your accounts, and determine, are you in the best possible position to provide for yourself as you age? So other than being proactive and getting documents in place, it's also super important to investigate care options. And this is to avoid the burden on an informal caregiver. So there are so many options, as I mentioned before, and they do change year to year. Here in Westchester County, we're seeing lots of different options for retirees, and some of them are listed here. So for example, continuing care community is a really novel concept. It follows the concept of aging in place, which means that you move onto a campus of properties, starts with a 65 and over or 55 and over condominium unit, which is on the same campus or down the street from an assisted living building, which is down the street from a nursing home. And the concept is that you move into that community and you age in place. No matter what your care needs are, they are managed in that community. You fund that care through your monthly dues, and you never have to leave that community. And the reason things like a continuing care community are important is it takes the burden off of your loved ones. If you should need care, those options are readily available to you in your own community. Similar to that would be the assisted living facility. So assisted living facilities are becoming very popular in this area. Some of the bigger names, the Bristol or the Atria, things of that nature, their communities almost look hotel-like in their nature. They provide 3 meals a day, laundry, housekeeping, things of that nature, and even medication management and higher levels of care should you need those kinds of supports. And again, that ensures that all of your needs are being met by a formal caregiving structure, thereby taking the burden off of any informal caregivers needing to do things like grocery shop for you or make sure your medications are refilled. Those things would all be handled in the facility. 55 and over and supportive housing, that's kind of a blend of the top two. It's more independent housing, maybe not on a campus, same campus as a nursing home, but within the community, maybe a social worker on site or a nurse practitioner who's available for residents. And these are becoming ever more popular as people leave their forever home and move into the next phase of their lives, wanting to still live independently, not in necessarily an assisted living unit, but also wanting some informal support to be provided by the housing complex. The bottom two are more of a step up in care level. So long-term care facilities, and the reason I term it that way is because I think the term nursing home necessarily gives the wrong impression. Nursing homes of old are not at all what nursing homes these days tend to look like. We have many here in Westchester where you almost wouldn't know you were in a nursing home at all. There's a big move toward different type of care, community facilities. So they are long-term care. They are for people whose conditions have advanced and who need 24-hour medical intervention. So you would not be appropriate at any of the top 3 options if you needed that level of care, but certainly a long-term care facility for anyone who has advancing Parkinson's or ALS or conditions of that kind. And that kind of partners with memory care communities, specific care of memory-related impairments. We've seen a huge increase in the number of communities or facilities that are dedicated specifically to those who don't have any other overarching medical need other than a continuity of care to address their cognitive impairment. And we've seen a number of companies that are almost part of a chain opening standalone memory care facilities just to address the issues that are specific to those with cognitive impairment. And that's really important because they provide a very specific type of care, less of a nursing home setting, because most people in the earlier stages, especially of cognitive impairment, don't need 24/7 medical intervention. they need support and they need housekeeping and meal preparation and medication reminder, but otherwise live a very rich life. And these memory care communities are an attempt to provide cutting edge care for memory impairment, because that field obviously is constantly coming up with new therapies, strategies, etc. And memory care communities can be really important for those informal caregivers who feel that they are burdened with day-to-day caregiving tasks. Becomes very overwhelming, very emotionally taxing, financially draining, and a memory care community can address those things. So not only planning with your financial planner for how you'll pay for these things, but looking forward, which of these options would you consider? Doing your homework, meeting people, going out into the community to make sure that you're informing yourself of what's available to you. And when we talk about this, we're saying think beyond just your parents. Think about anybody in your network who's a loved one, a neighbor, or a friend. And then, most importantly, think also about yourself. You're never too young to plan. You're never too young to have a will or advance directives. Just because you may not have children or you don't own a home, that does not mean you don't need advanced planning documents in place. And thinking about yourself and your own financial future, many of the policies that we talked about, long-term care, life insurance, are much more affordable in your younger years. Those are traditionally medically based policies. You need to qualify with a physical. So the younger you seek those products, the better off you'll be. Giving yourself the most flexibility in your plan not only gives you peace of mind, but passes peace of mind down to the generation behind you that will necessarily want to come in and take care of you. So if your parents haven't planned or your loved ones haven't planned, it's imperative to start to have the conversation, not just to avoid an interruption in care for them, but to avoid the unnecessary burden to you as an informal caregiver, an unpaid caregiver, you know, and all that comes with that loss of income, loss of retirement savings, etc. So we're here to help to talk through any or all of these scenarios, whether you're well or whether you're ill, and no matter your specific situation, consulting with an estate planning and elder law firm is a really important part of the process. So at this point, if anybody has any questions and wants to submit them, I'm happy to answer any questions. So I'll just wait a minute and see if any questions come in. Okay. At this point, it doesn't look like anybody has any questions, but please feel free. One of the greatest resources that we have here at Littman Krooks is our amazing website. Visit the website. There are tons of articles and links to various organizations, including Alzheimer's Association and others. We've written some very recent articles about the growing crisis in aging and how to confront the complex challenges that exist with long-term care. Also be on the lookout through our website for our upcoming Caregivers Conference in May, where we will address in person in a seminar setting some of the available options and allow you to access some providers who might be able to give you some very vital information. It's been my pleasure to conduct this webinar, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.